All right, and we are recording. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for the event tonight. My name is Shannon Alvord, and I am a part of the Tompkins County Emergency Operations Center's Public Information Team. The Health Department, in collaboration with numerous healthcare providers from across the county, is pleased to present to our community another opportunity for you to get your answers to questions regarding the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines. While tonight's event is to focus on vaccine safety concerns, I am happy to provide a brief update on the current status of vaccine distribution in Tompkins County. Things are much different since we last chatted with Dr. Snedeker back in February. Now, everyone ages 12 and up is eligible to be vaccinated, and more clinics are available in Tompkins County. While links to register for these clinics are often posted to the website now, to the Tompkins County Health Department website now, and they're shared widely on our social media, the Health Department is still utilizing the COVID-19 vaccine registry to contact people with information about available appointments, as well as identify areas where pop-up clinics may be successful. To date, we've hosted pop-up clinics in downtown Ithaca, on Ithaca's West Hill, in Groton, Newfield, Dryden, Enfield, and in Trumansburg. Individuals may use the registry to alert the health department to potential transportation needs, if they have homebound needs, or if, for example, they're in the 12 to 17 year age category, they will be prioritized for available local Pfizer vaccines. So I'd encourage everyone, if you have not already done so, to sign up on the COVID-19 vaccine registry from the health department to receive those clinic announcements. Once I'm done talking, I'll put those links in the chat box. So the registry form is also available in multiple languages, including Spanish, Chinese, and Korean. And for ages 12 and up, the health department is also coordinating closely with local school districts to set up at-school clinics, and you will be contacted directly by your school administration regarding those clinics. We will now begin with our Q&A. You can submit your questions via the Q&A chat box, or if you would prefer to ask your question out loud, I will give time at the end of the session to do so. So use the raise your hand function, and we'll put your name down in the order that I see them. We are recording the session to be able to share it with others post-event. So please let us know if you would like your question to be private, and we can remove it from the recording before posting the footage. We are joined today by Dr. Snedeker and Dr. Casey to discuss the COVID-19 vaccines for families and youth in greater detail. And please do feel free to send in your questions. We have received a lot of questions through email, so thank you to everyone who has sent your questions in advance. I look forward to getting through those questions tonight as best we can. Thank you all for joining us. Dr. Snedeker, Dr. Casey, what inspired you to want to participate in this event today?
Hi, Shannon. Well, it was a pleasure to be invited. I actually really enjoyed the last one I did. There were lots of great questions and good discussion. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation swirling about the world of COVID vaccines and COVID illness at the moment. I think the more information we can get out there that is based on what we actually know and what has been shown to be true is going to be helpful to people in making their own decision about whether to take advantage of these vaccines.
Yeah, I can only echo that. I feel the same thing. It's how we start to get back to normalcy, and the more comfortable people can feel with the choice that they make, I think the better.
Well, thank you both so much for coming tonight. Really glad to have you both here. Let's get started with a few questions that are a little bit like vaccine, like 101, just to give us a little bit of context here. Can you describe the science and the research behind the vaccines? So folks feel that the vaccine was made too quickly. Can you speak to that just briefly?
Sure. What a common concern expressed about these vaccines is that these vaccines were rushed through development. And it's certainly true that there has been a sense of urgency in getting these vaccines out to the public. But what people need to understand is that the safety testing that has preceded these vaccines being made available to the general public has been just as robust as all of the usual childhood vaccines that we use. What has really changed the game is the science that has allowed these vaccine candidates to be developed for that testing so quickly. So that's where the big time saving has been. And that's because people may recall a previous virus called SARS that was about a decade ago. It didn't blossom into a worldwide pandemic, but there was fear that it could. And vaccines started to be developed for that virus that we were able to take advantage of in creating the vaccines for this coronavirus. So that really sped up that part of the development process. The other thing that changed was in the FDA, the usual pace at which things move through the FDA is very slow. So you might do your clinical safety trial and submit it to the FDA, and you might wait 6 months to hear that your trial is now going to be reviewed. And then once that gets passed on, then another 3 to 4 months before it goes to the CDC. And so those steps have now been trimmed, where all that wasted time in the middle of it was cut out, so that the appropriate advisory bodies met in rapid succession. So, one agency would meet, and then the next one that needed to follow would do it within a couple of days or within a week. And that really sped up the approval process. But that's not shortcutting safety. The exact same studies were done to show that these vaccines are safe that have been done with all other vaccines that we currently use.
Excellent. Well, my next question was, I think you've already answered it. It asked to explain the difference between regular FDA approval and emergency use authorization for the vaccines. I do think you spoke to that nicely, but is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is that the emergency use authorization applies to a situation where there's an urgent need for a vaccine. And what that allows the FDA to do is to say, we think there's enough safety data already to allow this vaccine to be used, but we're going to continue to monitor very closely and gather additional data as the vaccines are actually deployed before we make a final decision on it being a routinely licensed vaccine that everybody can buy and use. And that's why the vaccine currently is being distributed only through the health department and through other agencies that the health department provides it to, such as pharmacies and things like that. But it isn't something that you can buy off the shelf just yet. It's very likely these vaccines will get standard approval very soon.
All right, thank you. What about the vaccine for ages 12 and up? Can you talk a little bit about the studies that were done on this age group and what the results were about its effectiveness and safety?
These studies happening at the same time that we were giving this, to hundreds of millions of people across the world, were, one of the concerns I hear is that they were small studies because it was only a few thousand people. But what they showed is that probably this vaccine has higher efficacy in kids in the 12 to 15 age range. There were no cases of COVID in kids that were in the study group. Zero. It was 100% effective. And again, extraordinarily safe in general. The side effects were not different than what we're seeing in adults.
Excellent. Okay. So folks often ask, why, how can we trust that this vaccine is safe? Why should we trust in this vaccine? What would your response be to that?
Well, I'd echo what Dr. Casey said. I mean, we, in addition to the very careful and completely done clinical trials that allowed these vaccines to receive emergency use authorization, they've now been given to hundreds of millions of people around the world, tens of millions in the United States. and their safety continues to be monitored. And that process has, number one, affirmed that the vaccines work just as well as they did in the test trials, that they are just as safe. And very few new side effects, if any, have been discovered in the process of getting it to larger numbers of people. And everybody who's been receiving these vaccines has the opportunity to report side effects, both minor and more serious, back to the CDC and the monitoring agencies. People are probably aware of a side effect that was discovered with respect to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine after it was licensed. And that's a good example of why this sort of monitoring is really important, because if a side effect occurs in only 1 or 2 in a million people, and you do a study of 50,000 or 100,000 people, that's a side effect you're not going to be able to detect at that stage of the game. So, common side effects or side effects that are very serious are apt to be picked up in those early stages, but it is important to monitor after a vaccine is licensed, whether it's under emergency use or routine use, for side effects that occur very, very rarely, but may still be related to the vaccine, and it's important to know about them. And that's a good example of one. It's extremely rare, and it is certainly still better to, it is a safe vaccine where the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh that small risk, but that's something that you can't detect in a small trial. And the point about the trials in children being small, that's absolutely true. And as those vaccines gain more wider use in children, we will continue to monitor for side effects that are very, very uncommon, but potentially of concern, so that the safety of the vaccines will continue to be reevaluated as time goes on.
And another thing that I found interesting as I was reading up for this is that through the history of vaccines, there have been vaccines that have serious long-term consequences, but they show up within 8 weeks. Universally, they've shown up within 8 weeks. And we've had more experience than that with these vaccines. So we would be expecting to start to see some of that if they were going to show up.
Thank you, Dr. Casey. That's a really great point. We did have a question that came in through email related to how do we report side effects and things that have occurred. So I have thrown some links for those into the chat box here. There's one tool called vSafe. The other is VAERS. So those are both tools that you can use that get reports of your side effects right back to the CDC. Right? Correct on that, Dr. Snedeker?
You're correct. And it's very important for people to understand that for VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, that's what those letters stand for, that you don't have to know for sure that whatever symptom you're experiencing is due to a vaccine. If something happens to you a week or two after you've received a vaccination and you think it might be related to the vaccine, but you're not really sure, that can and should be reported anyway, because VAERS is how we learn about things that might turn out to be side effects and might not. In any one individual, it's often hard to know those things, but if you amass comments like that from tens of thousands of people, you can sometimes tell, oh yes, this really is different in vaccinated people, or no, it actually isn't. This thing that you thought might be related to the vaccine, in fact, is just random chance, and it's happening no more often in vaccinated people than in unvaccinated people. So it's very important for people to take advantage of that system. And doctors can report through VAERS, but people can too. And not to say that doctors aren't people, but the general public is invited to submit reports through VAERS, and they can be done so with identification or anonymously, and that information is all collated and looked at very careful for these sorts of signals.
Thank you both so much. While we're still on this topic about the vaccine and side effects and concerns, in relation to the pause on Johnson & Johnson, are there any concerns about that for the Pfizer vaccine that is currently available to youth ages 12 and up?
There at this point is not. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine in the US and then the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe use the same vaccine technology. It's a viral vector technology. And those seems to be the vaccine technology that's associated with this side effect. There's not been any cases of this seen with the mRNA vaccines.
And those vaccines have not yet been given to children outside of clinical trials. And so we don't know if that side effect will occur in adolescents yet or not. If you did a study of 20,000 adolescents, you still probably wouldn't be able to pick that up until after the vaccine is more widely used. So that's something that will certainly be monitored for as time goes on. Fortunately, it is clearly a rare enough side effect that it doesn't meaningfully affect the overall safety of the vaccine.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. We've had a question come in through our chat box that's kind of on the same topic, so we'll go ahead and answer that. Just asking about if either of you know if mRNA vaccines have been used in cancer research for the past decade. Curveball.
I know about that much because I've read like that sentence, but that's about what I know.
Okay.
But yes,
Yeah,
yes, I don't know anything deeper than that.
I don't know too much more than that. What I know is that the mRNA vaccine platform is a very attractive one for developing new vaccines because it's very easy to manipulate in a scientific way. So you could almost view it like a cartridge system where the mRNA backbone, you can insert a cartridge in it that has the thing that you want to try and generate immunity against, and you've got a vaccine. It's not like you have to make that product in the laboratory and purify it and make sure that it's still active. Many older vaccines were developed in that way, but this is a technology that's going to be applied, I think, to many other infectious diseases, and also for people who are trying to use the immune system to fight cancer. It's a very attractive vehicle for that. But I don't have any information about how effective that's been or can comment on any specifics about it.
Thanks. So I think that's a great question, and just highlighting, that the mRNA vaccines, while this may be new to us in the medical field, it's not as brand new as it feels. So I think that's a good example. Okay. Talking a little bit about side effects. Have children been reported to experience similar side effects or reactions to the Pfizer vaccine as adults? And what are the typical reactions that you could expect?
Yeah, the side effects in kids, the 12 and up group, are really the same as we see in adults. Arm soreness, body aches, fevers, fatigue, headache. And that's the same things that were reported.
Right. And that's been our experience. We've been able to have some vaccine in our office that we've given out over the past few days, and we've probably given it to maybe 300 kids so far. So far, no serious side effects have been reported. We're not hearing a lot about sore arms. I've seen a couple of kids in the office that have already received the vaccine a week or two ago, and a lot of them are saying, not much happened.
They always do better than adults anyway. They just do.
Yeah, kids are tough. That's so true. How long do those side effects typically last?
Usually it's a matter of just a couple of days at most. The first day or two after the vaccination is when your immune system is recognizing that there is a foreign substance there that it is starting to make antibodies against. And so that accounts for the discomfort at the site and the fever and the aches. Those are all signs that your immune system is doing what it's supposed to do, what we want the vaccine to make it do. And then, usually after that, within a day or two, people are feeling pretty good again, and back to the way they were before. Longer term side effects than that have been most unusual.
Great. Okay. Since many of our attendees tonight are mostly interested in finding out about the vaccine in relation to children or young folks that they are friends with. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about the Pfizer vaccine. Why is this one the only one that's available for those ages 12 and up?
Well, they got their foot in the door first, basically. So Pfizer was the company that got their adolescent studies started a little bit ahead of the others. And so they were completed a little bit ahead of the others. And that's why this is the first one that has been permitted for use in kids 12 and older. The Moderna vaccine studies in adolescents have been completed. The FDA is still reviewing the data, but it's very likely that that vaccine too will be approved for the same age children, probably within the next few weeks. I don't have an inside track on the FDA's decision-making process, but the likelihood is pretty great that that one will be coming along pretty soon. And the Janssen vaccine has also been studied in adolescents. Those studies, if they're not completed, are pretty close to being wrapped up. And usually it takes a month or two after the vaccines are completed to collect preliminary data. There's definitely more months of monitoring that follows after that. And then that all has to be reviewed before the vaccines are licensed for use. But it's basically an artifact of timing. And it's also an artifact of the company's decision that the Pfizer vaccine was approved for 16 and up and Moderna for 18 and up initially. That's only because that's the way they designed their first set of studies about the vaccine, and it has no other implications about safety or effectiveness.
Thank you for explaining that. That's very helpful. When I know that you just said you don't have a fast track to the CDC's process here, but would you predict that the Pfizer vaccine is what will be available for younger ages next? And when do you predict it might be available?
Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Casey, I'll speak to that again, but all of these vaccines are now enrolling children in studies for children now between as old as 11 and as young as 6 months. And those studies are going to be somewhat larger because that population is more diverse. And if you want to know that the vaccine behaves the same in toddlers as it does in school age kids, as it does in middle school age kids, you need more people in the studies to do it. I think Pfizer is looking to get something like 6,000 kids or 7,000 kids in those studies. Moderna and Johnson & Johnson are doing the same thing. And typically these studies take about 4 to 6 months for the study itself to be done. And then there's the data crunching that has to come after that. So I think if everything went as quickly as it possibly could and the results from the studies were as good as the ones from the previous studies has been, we might possibly see these vaccines available for younger kids by the end of the year. I think it's a little bit more likely that it'll be early 2022 before they actually become available, but it's likely to be somewhere in that ballpark, assuming that things go well. If there are any problems that are determined, and one of the different issues for younger kids is a dosing question. Should we use the same dose as we do for adults, or will smaller doses be as effective and maybe with milder side effects? So that's also part of these studies, and that makes things a little bit more complicated.
Thank you. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you. So can you tell us a little bit more about what is in the Pfizer vaccine? Are there allergies to be concerned of? Added ingredients?
Sure. So the ingredients are the RNA molecule, and RNA is the substance that allows your body to know what proteins to make in the cells of your body. It is not genetic material in the sense that it is not DNA. It does not get incorporated into your DNA. It does not get passed on to other generations or anything like that. It's very, very fragile, actually, and it only hangs around for, on the order of hours before it's degraded in the body. But the proteins that are made from it are then what the vaccine reacts against. In addition to that, because RNA is so fragile, it has to be encapsulated in what's called lipid or fat in very tiny little particles. And so the fat ingredients or the vaccine are what protects the RNA and what allows it to be dispersed from the injection site. So there's that. And then there's some buffers, salt and water and things like that. That's basically it. It's why these vaccines have to be kept frozen. There aren't preservatives or things like that, and then they have to be used right away. They can't be stored very long once the vials have been opened. So these are actually very simple in terms of the components of the ingredients themselves. Allergic reactions are possible to any foreign substance. So it is possible for them to occur, but that's actually been quite unusual in the studies that were done adults, and similarly in kids. True allergic reactions have been very uncommon. And it's important for people to understand that when you have a sore arm and fever after the vaccination, that is not an allergic reaction. We're talking about things like hives or wheezing or difficulty breathing or swelling in your throat. Those are true allergic reactions, and those are extremely uncommon following these vaccines, and in fact, all vaccines that we use.
Thank you. We've had some folks send in questions in advance of our session tonight, and one of those was, how can I best explain to my children about what this vaccine is and what it does? Do you have any tips or advice about that?
I mean, I think, kids clearly know that this is not normal life. And what you can say is, like we've been saying to them from the beginning, this is how we take care of each other. This is how a community keeps its vulnerable people from getting sick. And that, we're not doing this to hurt you. We're doing this to keep you safe, and we're doing it to keep your grandmother safe. And we're doing it, that's generally the conversation I have with kids around this. Because they know this has been a weird year. They know that, that they get it, unless they're teeny tiny and they're not getting the vaccines anyway. But the teenagers especially, it's been really, really tough, to give them a chance to get back to some normal life is huge.
All kids that are old enough to know about shots know that they get them from time to time. And so the concept of getting a shot is not a new thing. I think one thing you can do is explain to them that the shots that they've gotten before have protected them from other diseases that they probably haven't heard of. And that's kept them safe and allowed them to grow up and be healthy. And now that we have this new virus that can make them sick, this is another way to protect themselves against this one.
Thank
The
you
kids
so much.
the kids in my view are a lot less worried about side effects and things like that. They seem to get why these vaccines are important. They want to know if their arm's going to hurt, and they want to know if it's going to make them feel bad. Most of them are on board, and I've been surprised how accepting they've been.
Thank you. That's great answers. My daughter, who is only 4.5 and is not quite eligible to get vaccinated yet, she asks me all the time, when you get vaccinated, can you stop wearing a mask? What is the current guidance on that?
I would say the current guidance on that is yes, but. And so we know these vaccines work really, really well, and they protect the people who have received them. But that no vaccine is 100% effective. And so part of determining how much at risk are you for getting something like COVID depends not only on whether you're vaccinated or not, but how likely is it that you're going to be exposed, and what's the risk of your exposing other people. So, the guidance that has changed recently is that if you're vaccinated, you can be around other people outdoors without wearing a mask, and you can be around other people indoors in many circumstances without wearing a mask. But if you're in a situation where there are large crowds of people, that increases the possibility that you may be exposed. If you are with other people who are vulnerable and are not yet vaccinated themselves or not yet able to be vaccinated, that's going to change that calculation a little bit. If, like Dr. Casey and me, you work in a healthcare environment where we are obligated to protect our patients absolutely as much as I can, even if I am vaccinated, I am still wearing a mask, and I will continue to do so for the time being, in part to protect myself, but more importantly, to protect my patients.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a question just about the vaccine in general. Does the vaccine give you COVID?
No. No, there is no live virus in the vaccine. There is no virus in the vaccine. Pfizer vaccine just has a little bit of messenger RNA.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, what about the variants? Is the vaccine proving to be effective against them at all? We had a email in today from a viewer who was really concerned about what's going on in India, that the variant there seems to be impacting children more widely. So just getting your pulse on that and what the experience locally has been like with variants.
Sure. So that's another yes, but answered. So far, the vaccines that are currently licensed have proven to be very effective against most of the variants that have so far been identified. But this is apt to be a moving target as time goes on because new variants are likely to continue to emerge. That this is the process of evolution and natural selection that we all learned about in biology class, where when hundreds of millions of people get infected with this virus, it gives the opportunity for variations in the virus to develop. And if those variants are either more contagious or cause more illness, spread more easily, or are resistant to pre-existing immunity, they are going to gain traction and they will become more widespread. So the news so far is very, very good, but this is something that needs to be monitored very closely as time goes on because we don't know all the possible variants that might emerge in the future that might be perhaps less well covered by the vaccines that we now use. The great thing about the mRNA platform is that it also allows the manufacturers to tweak these vaccines pretty easily. And of course, whenever you tweak something, then you have to reevaluate it and make sure that it still works and that you didn't introduce some new side effect. But they are already creating mRNA variation vaccines that take into account some of these variants and may work against them even better. Those studies are still being done. So I think for now, the concern about variants being resistant to the vaccine, at least the variants we're seeing in the United States right now, is not a big concern, but stay tuned because the situation may change.
And the other part of that question, it does seem like some of the variants, certainly the Brazil variant and the UK variant, do seem to be making younger people sicker. I'm sure some function of that is that we have more of the older part of the population is vaccinated, but certainly that is panning out both in the UK and in Brazil. And I think we'll find out with the India variant as time goes by that if it sounds like that might be true, it probably, we'll have more information as time goes by.
Sure. Okay. So a lot of questions have come in regarding, if my child had COVID, do they still need to be vaccinated or do they now have like a natural immunity? Is the vaccine unnecessary if they've already had COVID?
No, it is still very strongly recommended that kids who have had COVID get the vaccine. Your immune system does develop some immunity after you have a COVID illness. We don't know how durable that immunity is, how long it lasts for. Second cases of COVID have been reported. They're not very common, but it can definitely happen. And we know because some of the people in some of these vaccine trials have in fact had COVID before. We know that they get a great immune response to the vaccine. It works really, really well for them. And so they get even higher antibodies than higher antibody levels than people who have not had COVID before, and the vaccines seem equally safe. It may turn out at some point that a decision could be made that fewer doses might be needed in people who've already had COVID because the initial infection may have already primed their immune system. We are not there right now. The schedule is the same whether you've had COVID before or not. But yes, we definitely recommend that kids get these vaccines because it will probably make that immunity much more durable, and that way they're not at risk for having a second episode.
And we do know that some of the variants have what are called escape mutations, that make that second infection possible. That they evade the antibodies that were, their mutation specifically evades the antibodies that were made to the first infection.
Right. And it's interesting that in that regard, some of the vaccines seem to perform significantly better than a natural COVID infection at protecting you. And that's another good reason for people who've already had it to get vaccinated.
Great. That's great to know. So I'm going to skip to a question that is kind of connected to this on my list here. So you've mentioned this, and people have heard that, if you get the vaccine, you can still get sick from COVID, but that you are less likely to have severe illness or hospitalization or death. How would you know if you're experiencing little to no symptoms? How would you know that you have COVID? Are you at risk of exposing others? I think this question came in particular with like concern that, okay, now we're vaccinated, we're going to maybe not be wearing our masks as often. So can you speak a little bit to what people might experience if they get sick while vaccinated, and what they should know about that?
Sure. So the first thing to say about that is that happens with COVID anyway in unvaccinated people too. A significant proportion of people who get it don't develop symptoms that make it obvious that they have COVID and they're shedding virus. What we know about vaccinated people is that it's much harder to get them infected in the first place, and they do get milder symptoms. And it appears that they shed less virus. That's a harder question to answer, actually, than how well it protects them from illness, because all you have to do is wait and see how many people get sick. To actually test how much virus you are spreading is a much more difficult question to answer, and it requires you to shove swabs up people's noses every day for weeks on end, which typically they don't want you to do.
No volunteers for that.
very few volunteers for those sorts of studies, but some of them have been done, and they do show less virus shedding. In experimental animals, when these vaccines are tested on animals before they go into human trials, the animals shed way less virus if they are infected experimentally. So that suggests that vaccinated people probably are a lot less contagious, whether they have breakthrough symptoms if they get a mild COVID case, or even if they have an asymptomatic infection where they don't have any symptoms at all. But we still can't be so confident of that we should be letting down our guard entirely about the mask question. And that's why unmasking in certain situations for vaccinated people is now considered safe. But there's still certain circumstances where masking probably does give you some additional protection. And as I said earlier, even though these vaccines are upwards of 90% effective, that's not the same as 100%. And there still are going to be occasional people who develop COVID despite being vaccinated, and they can be a threat to their neighbors and their families if they are shedding virus. So it's still important to be prudent. We will never get to a place where we have zero risk of this. We're getting to a place now where the risks are very, very much less than they were many, many months ago, and I hope that will continue to be the case going forward. But we are never going to have a world that is completely free of COVID, and universal vaccination is the best way to get as close to that as we possibly can.
Great, thank you so much for that answer. So mask wearing when in certain situations, continued hand washing, social distancing, those are all still really key measures that we can all take in addition to getting vaccinated.
And if I can chip in one more observation about the mask question, I didn't see a single case of influenza this winter for the first time in my entire career. We have had almost no ear infections. We've had almost no diarrheal illnesses. People have been far healthier this year because they've been washing their hands and keeping distance and wearing masks and things like that. So in addition to protecting us from COVID, masks have been protecting us from lots of other things too. And I think, going forward, we need to think seriously about the potential usefulness usefulness of masks, even in a world where most of us are vaccinated against COVID, because there are clearly other benefits. Now, there are downsides from wearing masks too. We all know they're uncomfortable and we like to see other people's faces and things like that. But, it may be the case that in the future, wearing a mask in the winter season at school to protect yourself from flu becomes more accepted than it has in the past. That has already been the norm in some parts of the world. We haven't gotten there in the United States, but it's something that we ought to be thinking about going forward.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, some questions have come in about if I am pregnant or planning to become pregnant, will the vaccine allow me to pass protection onto my child through placenta? Are any studies being done about the safety of the vaccine in pregnant women?
Yes. So there are two ways that a vaccinated mother can pass on protection to their baby. Antibodies from the mother do pass through the placenta toward the end of a pregnancy and can give the baby some advanced protection against exposure to COVID. There are also a different kind of antibodies that go in breast milk that can coat the throat and the intestinal tract of the baby. And that also reduces the risk of infection, although if infection gets past that initial barrier, it doesn't provide any initial immunity beyond that point. This is true of all vaccines. It's one reason why we encourage women to get vaccinated against pertussis and flu during pregnancy, because that protects their babies. So it is advantageous for pregnant women to receive this vaccine in order to protect their children. The studies that have been done on the safety in pregnant women have been very reassuring. There has not been a higher rate of pregnancy loss in people who have received the vaccine compared to women who have not. There is a higher rate of loss of pregnancy in women who get COVID compared to women who do not. So currently the recommendation is definitely pregnant women should take advantage of this vaccine, particularly since we can't immunize babies against it. Now, when babies do get COVID, as sometimes happens when another family member is infected, they usually do pretty well. They don't tend to get severe symptoms for the most part, but there certainly are occasional exceptions to that where a newborn gets very sick, and we want to prevent that to the extent that we can.
So you mentioned, towards the later end of pregnancy, the benefits of the vaccine may be passed along through the placenta. Is there, and you also mentioned that there is potential for miscarriage from COVID itself as an illness. So is there a time in a pregnancy where it is best to get the vaccine? Should you wait until you're past that early first trimester where things are a little uncertain? Do you have any information about that?
There's no solid information yet to really base confident recommendations on, but because COVID does pose a risk to the mother herself and to losing the pregnancy, the consensus is that it's probably best to go ahead and get the vaccine wherever you are in your pregnancy. If it's early on, go ahead and do it. You'll be protecting yourself and hopefully improving the chances of having a successful pregnancy. And the odds are pretty good that you'll still have antibodies at the end of the pregnancy, because the evidence so far is that the antibody levels from these vaccines stay high for a long time. So I don't think there's any reason to wait and think that it might be advantageous to do it right at the very end. I think the advice I would give to a pregnant woman is, if you have the opportunity to go ahead and get the vaccine, do it now, regardless of what stage of the pregnancy you're at.
We've also heard questions about concerns that the vaccines might impact fertility. And these are questions we've received from both males and females. So have you heard anything about impacts on fertility?
There are not any. That comes from something that was just not a real piece of information that unfortunately sort of morphed into sort of a commonly known thing, but there's not any scientific reason that that would happen. There's no biological reason that would happen. I could explain more, but
it's highly implausible, but the truth is, if you wanted to answer that question in a scientifically rigorous way, you would probably have to design a 5 to 10 year study. And that obviously the virus has only been with us for a short time. So it would be highly unusual, because no other vaccine that we use does that. And anybody who purports to have information that that's the case simply isn't telling the truth, because there would be no way to know that at this point in time. But it is not really a concern that has a good theoretical basis for thinking that it could happen. And so I would certainly not hesitate to receive the vaccine on those grounds.
Great. Thank you so much for those answers. So another question here. In my family, we take a lot of vitamins and we keep ourselves healthy. Why do we need to get this vaccine?
Well, good for you. I endorse eating healthy and making sure that you have a good diet that provides all the nutrients that you need. That may give your immune system a slight edge if you get COVID compared to somebody who is malnourished, but it in no way protects you from getting COVID in the first place. So could you potentially have a slightly milder illness? Maybe. I don't think we actually know that. There are some illnesses that are more severe if you are deficient in certain vitamins. Measles is an example of that, where if you're deficient in vitamin A, it can cause much more serious complications than a regular case of measles. So by all means do that. But a wonderful diet would not protect you from measles, and it doesn't protect you from flu, and it will not protect you from COVID.
And this is a brand new virus. This is not something that our immune systems have seen something like before. So flu, your body's seen some flu before. So you may have some immunity so you don't get as sick. This is new. This is not something that we have that for. I mean, it's a year old, but it's only a year old.
Great. We had some questions last week that I think are really, last time we did an office hour, that I think are important to address here. Just about the Pfizer vaccine and the second dose. If I've missed my second dose, does it matter how much later I get it? Should I still get it? Am I protected enough from one dose?
So getting one dose protects you in the short term. We don't have much information about how long that immunity might last for. The intervals that are specified for the vaccines for the time between doses, 3 weeks in the case of Pfizer and 4 in the case of Moderna, are the minimum intervals. So you can go longer than that. And so if you can't get your vaccine until the 5th week or the 6th week, or whenever, you should do it. Regardless of when that second dose happens, it still counts as a second dose no matter how late it is. But you have to keep in mind that during that interval where you've only had one dose, you are not as well protected as if you had 2. And that may be increasingly true the farther distance out you get from that first dose.
I have to say, I was working a vaccine clinic, and I had a patient, a person come in that had gotten their first vaccine way back at the beginning in December. And this was sometime, I think, at the end of last month. She actually had to repeat her series after discussion with the health department and the CDC. So that's what they decided. It was far enough out. She should get both doses. She should get 2 doses restart.
Okay.
Well, I think that recommendation probably comes from just simply lack of data about that. But for every other vaccine that we use, you don't restart no matter how far you out from your first dose. And so I think as we gain more experience with this vaccine, that will probably be true. I'm in no way encouraging people to wait 6 months for their second dose. That's not what I mean at all. I just mean that if it slipped through the cracks, or if you missed your appointment, or if you were just hesitant to get the second dose for some reason, go ahead and get it now, and you won't have to start over unless it's been a really long time.
Great, and I will throw into the chat box here in just a minute a link to where on the Tompkins County Health Department's website you can find what to do if you've missed your second dose. So you can contact the health department directly and they will help you to schedule your second dose. Okay, so my next question, I know we're kind of rearing towards the end of our hour here, so anyone, if you have any questions you would like asked before we close out, please do throw those into the Q&A feature, or use the raise your hand function if you'd like to ask your question out loud. While I wait to see if any questions are coming in, I'll pose this one to you both, which is kind of a good closing question about why we are encouraging everyone to get vaccinated when they can. So can we talk about the risks of COVID-19 itself, the long-term impacts, if we're weighing the risks of the vaccine versus risks of the disease, how do those measure up?
So the risks of the vaccine are trivial compared to the potential complications of COVID. There are no long-term side effects of these vaccines as far as we can tell. There are potentially long-term consequences of COVID that we are really just beginning to learn about. People have possibly heard of the so-called long haul syndrome, where even after your COVID illness, you still feel unwell physically and in some cases mentally for weeks to months afterward. There is the significant mortality rate for COVID in elderly individuals and in people with compromised immune systems and certain underlying conditions. But even in healthy young individuals, there are occasional deaths from COVID, and that is not happening with the vaccine. We are all sick and tired of wearing masks and being separated from one another and having school closures and work restrictions. The only way we are going to get back to things somewhere close to where they were before this pandemic hit is to have so many people vaccinated that the virus is a rare thing. And that we will never get there if half of the population decides not to be vaccinated, or at least it'll take a very long time because we'll have to wait for them all to get COVID. And just as a sidebar, it's not good to operate based on anecdote, but we had an 18-year-old who was in the ICU last week for 4 days with COVID, and so it can affect young people adversely under certain circumstances. Even though young individuals by and large come through COVID much better than people who are at higher risk, they definitely benefit themselves if they get vaccinated. Getting the vaccine is far less risky than taking the chance that they might get COVID. And it is also benefiting all of us if as many of us as possible get vaccinated. And we have to include kids in that equation if we're going to get there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in closing tonight here, I don't have any questions coming in. Thank you all to all of our participants for joining us tonight and listening in. I'll ask one final question to you both. What do you feel is most encouraging about the stage of the vaccination process in the midst of this pandemic?
I feel like we're really starting to see what a difference it makes. We're finally, enough people are vaccinated. We're far enough out from it. We're starting to see that it works. We're starting to be able to do more stuff. I'm particularly happy that Broadway's opening soon. We really, and I have to say, I keep saying this, we've done such a good job in this county that it begins to feel, I feel like we've done this as well as we could have done it, and are gonna, I think, have a reasonably, our summer's gonna look so much more normal than last summer.
There has been tremendous collaboration between the health department and our local health system and provider offices and the schools, and everybody has been working together on this and pulling hard to make this effort possible. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. Tompkins County has been extraordinarily fortunate. We've had a lot less COVID than other places have. We have higher vaccination rates than other places. And we've really, our local agencies and all the people that have been collaborating on this have done a fantastic job. And I'm really proud of that. And I don't take any personal credit for that at all, because I haven't been involved in the lion's share of those discussions, but it's just been a great effort, and seeing everybody pull together with a common goal has been really heartening.
Sorry, my mouse pad stopped working, so I couldn't unmute myself. Yes, thank you both so much for those answers. I agree with your sentiment so much. It's been so encouraging to see the county's uptake of the vaccine itself. We're at 71%. Tompkins County residents are vaccinated, and we hope that that number continues to increase so we can really be a truly protected community. And that goes out to thanks to our viewers for your interest and support, and thanks to doctors like yourself who have supported the health department in doing these Q&As and responding to questions and being available and open and transparent about all of the situation that's been really new and developing for us all this past year plus at this point. There was a question in the chat about where and when can I access this recording. Since I missed part of it, it will be posted at some point tomorrow. The goal is for the morning. We'll see how things go. It will be posted tomorrow on the county's YouTube page. I put the link for that in the chat, but I know sometimes you can't copy and paste from the chat box. So if you Google Tompkins County YouTube, it will populate right up, and it will be right there on the home page there. There's also the past recordings are available as well, but our information now is even more current and relevant. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Snedeker and Dr. Casey, for doing this with us tonight. I appreciate your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Great.
You're welcome.